This looks interesting. Are the longevity benefits of intermittent fasting less effective if you wait until later in life to start? However, before that can be answered, you must first beg the question, can an old dog learn new tricks? Hey, Kimmy. Hey, what's happening? Okay, so I need your help for something. I need to confirm if an old dog can do new tricks. All right? So, just watch me and try to, do what I do. All right? First one. Down here, and then we go like this. Yeah, okay. That was a hard one. Let's take it down a notch. How about chase the tail? Chase the tail? Look, watch. Okay. All right. Okay, all right. The basics. We're gonna do an easy one here. Ready? Lie. Hey, where are you going? It's because I called you old, isn't it? I didn't mean it. Yo, what is up? Welcome back to another week of How to Health. My name is Kevin. I run liftandbalance.com, where we take aim at all things health and do it in an odd, weird, interesting, and highly sarcastic manner. Today, we are going to try and tease out the best or most optimal point in one's life to implement an intermittent fasting protocol with a goal of maximizing longevity, or the truly healthy, disease-free years of one's life. And since at this point we've covered 40 plus videos on how a fasting protocol may help one defy the odds of aging, I think it's only about time we flip the script and ask, what is the most optimal point in one's life to hop on the fasting wagon? You know, that wagon cruising right down Longevity Boulevard? Don't worry, production team's driving. Maybe we should be worried. The facts of the matter are, most people implement a fasting protocol as a strategy to improve a particular health circumstance. And that's awesome, because it works on so many levels for so many conditions. But when we're thinking in terms of longevity, thinking in terms of extending those healthy years of life as far out as humanly possible, otherwise known as health span, is there a cutoff? A point in time where the protocol becomes less effective, where the cellular magic dies off? And the answer is, we don't know in humans. However, a group of researchers did a pretty clever study in mice that provides some rather interesting clues. This research looked into the impact of dietary restriction implemented at different stages in these furry little guys' lives, seeking out an answer to the aforementioned question. By what age should an organism implement a dietary restriction protocol to get the maximum longevity benefits? And what, if any, are the variables that play a role in the effectiveness of the protocol? So before we dig in, let's cover some housekeeping items. First, dietary restriction and fasting are not the same thing. Dietary restriction is the chronic restriction of energy over a long period of time. We are talking years on years, on years, on years. And this has been shown to be both health and life extending in many animal models, and has shown promise in humans to the extent that it could be properly studied, which isn't that extensive. Ethics. Now, dietary fasting is the willing abstinence of food, drink, or both over a period of time. And there are a few different types, which we cover extensively in the How to Fast playlist. There's prolonged fasting, which is typically 36 hours and above. There is intermittent fasting, which is typically 24 hours plus of fasting, but still under that 36-hour range. Something like alternate day fasting, or the 5-2 protocol, which is eating 5 days, fasting 2 days a week. And then we have time restricted feeding, which is the feeding fasting windows over a 24-hour period, or a day. And this is where most people fall. One of the most popular fasting protocols being something like a 16-8, 16 hours of fasting, 8 hours of feeding per 24-hour period. So, as you can see, dietary restriction and fasting are two different things. But that doesn't mean they can't or shouldn't be used together, which we discuss in this video here. They're just different. And when we think about the topic in terms of compliance or the ability to sustain the protocol, quite frankly, chronic dietary restriction or chronically restricting your calories is hard.
This is hard. I am in a pickle.
I mean, eating less for, ever don't seem like no fun. And even though its longevity benefits seem pretty solid, overall, it's pretty low on the long-term sustainability index. And production team, I know what you're thinking. If only there were an easier way to reap all the benefits of dietary restriction without the eating less part, right? Yeah, you weren't thinking that? You just want the shoot to be production team. Enter fasting. Research suggests that a fasting protocol can mimic many of the benefits an organism gets from chronic dietary restriction, without the restriction part, only consuming your food in a strategic window each and every day, activating many of the same cellular mechanisms and longevity pathways. Now that's what I'm talking about. All right, so now that we have that background, let's circle back to this research. Key thing to note here, this research was focused on the effects of dietary restriction on the mice, not fasting. But knowing what we covered about the similar activation of longevity pathways, I can't help but wonder if it pertains to fasting as well. And I know, wonder is a dangerous word in science. So take this interpretation with that grain of salt. And remember, mice happen to be a, tad bit different than humans, all in all. All right, we good? The research. This research was performed out of the Max Planck Institute of Biological Aging and published in Nature Metabolism. The objectives were simple: to see how dietary restriction implemented at a later point in an organism's life impacts lifespan and health span. Here are the methods. Researchers started out with 800 genetically similar mice. They fed them normally for the first 3 months, and then they did the first split. Half of them going into an ad libitum group, meaning they ate whenever they wanted, and the other half going into a chronic dietary restriction group, meaning they were fed chronically less calories. Then, at 24 months, there was another split. First, the ad libitum group was split in half, one half going and continuing ad libitum feeding, while the other half transitioned to dietary restriction. And then the dietary restriction group was split in half, one going to ad libitum feeding and the other sticking with dietary restriction. And for reference, a 24-month-old mice roughly correlates to a 55 to 60-year-old human. 2 months after the final split, samples of liver, brown adipose tissue, and white adipose tissue were collected and analyzed to see how these late-in-life dietary switches impacted the organism's health. Reminder, organism being mice. So what happened? The results. As you can imagine, the mice that stayed on the dietary restriction all the way through lived the longest and the healthiest lives, but probably had the least amount of mouse fun. While again, as you probably could have guessed, the group that had ad libitum feeding all the way through had the shortest lifespan, but possibly the most fun. I don't know if there's a way to measure that, but there should be. Now here's where it gets juicy. The mice that followed a dietary restricted protocol and then switched at month 24 to ad libitum saw a rapid and steep increase in mortality, aka death, while the mice switching from ad libitum to dietary restriction at 24 months saw only a slight decrease in mortality rate, which remained much higher than those chronically dietary restricted mice. Now, is there anything in the tissue samples collected 2 months after the last switch that could explain all this? Here's what researchers saw. While the gene activity in the liver quickly adapted in the mice that were switched into the DR diet, scientists observed a memory effect in the fat tissue of the older animals. And although the older mice lost weight when transitioning from ad libitum to dietary restriction, the gene activity in their fat tissue was similar to that of the mice that just continued eating whatever they wanted. This right here suggests that some longevity pathways associated with DR may be dampened if the protocol is implemented in the later stages of life. But just to be sure, what happens when this intervention is implemented earlier in the life of the organism? And researchers looked at this, repeating the experiment in young mice and switching from ad libitum to dietary restriction at week 12. 2 months later, these same tissue samples in the liver and fat tissues were analyzed. And interestingly, there was a complete reprogramming of all of the tissue. Genes that were resistant in the older mice showed full sensitivity when the intervention was implemented in younger mice. Thus, researchers concluded that the adipose tissue transcriptome was highly responsive to dietary restriction in young mice. But this transcriptional flexibility declined with age, particularly in the white adipose tissue. Well, that solves that. So what's the verdict here? Well, once we navigate past the point that rats are not humans, although some humans are rats, we can look into the potential importance of these findings. First, some key points to note. 1. These mice were subject to calorie restriction, not intermittent fasting or a fasting regimen. We humans tend to not like or sustain eating less forever. So we do things to mimic the effects of calorie restriction, aka intermittent fasting. 2. The real question for humans is, do the longevity benefits of a fasting protocol decrease in their effectiveness as we push the onstart of the protocol to the later years of life? And for that, there is no definite answer at this point. But data like this suggests that it could be the case. The way that I, a non-scientist or medical professional, interpret this data is, if you are an adult, which I'll define as 23 years and older, and you have a vested interest in your longevity, aka living the healthiest possible life as long as humanly possible, then today is probably a good day to start observing your eating habits and strategizing on how you can implement a sustainable protocol. If you're willing and able, that could be something like caloric restriction. But as we know, that gets old kind of fast and is like a -1,000,000 on the fun meter. However, as we talked about many times throughout this video, an intermittent fasting or time-restricted feeding protocol could and probably is a good place to start. And if you're wondering how, I got you covered. Check out this video that gives you a full breakdown on how to build a sustainable protocol for you. As you can see from this research, there is a lot going on at the cellular and metabolic level when we implement change in our eating habits. And that right there is where the true longevity magic is really happening. Things we notice like shedding a couple of pounds, having more energy, better sleep, good mood, clearer skin are just a byproduct of all that cellular goodness happening on the inside. And that's what I got. Moral of the story, if you have longevity in mind, right here, right now, probably a good time. As always, let me know what comments, questions, any random thoughts you have down in the comments below. And remember, when it comes to health, there is no better day to start investing than today and tomorrow. And like the net. Just do it every day. Promise?